Glad to be joined by one of our favorite guys, Connor Rogers, Bleacher Report, also Stick to Football podcast. Connor, what's going on, brother?
Not much, Hester. How we doing, dude?
Doing well. Always glad to have you on. Hey, can you kind of relax a little bit now? The draft's over. I know you're finally taking a break from the Stick to Football podcast just for a couple of weeks just so you can kind of recharge a little bit.
A little bit. It feels kind of weird. I actually we haven't taken a break on Stick to Football since it started over 3 years ago. So this is going to be kind of nice. Now, I have to admit, I turned on some Trevor Lawrence tape this morning because I just can't contain the excitement for next year already, but it will be a nice little getaway.
Hey, as an LSU fan and someone who played here, I can just tell you, turn on the championship game and maybe that excitement will go down a little bit.
Yep.
Oh, hey, we got to give our credit where credit is due. Trevor Lawrence is going to be obviously the number one pick in next year's draft, but let's talk about this year's draft. Let's talk about those LSU Tigers that not only went in the first round, but throughout the draft. I mean, when you have 14 guys selected, there's a lot to like there. So it doesn't have to be a first-round pick. It can be anybody on the board, Connor. Out of all the LSU fits, is it as easy to say that Clyde Edwards-Helaire to the Kansas City Chiefs just made the most sense?
It is. I mean, when you look at what he does best, you look at Andy Reid's history with running backs, especially a guy like Brian Westbrook, and just the fact of how high-powered this offense is. They have a decent offensive line. They have an all-world quarterback that, can be as good as anybody that ever played the game these next 10 years. They have great wide receivers, maybe the best tight end in the NFL. So when you look at the offense and a great play caller and a good offensive staff that coach those guys up, you're sitting there and saying, man, if I could add one thing to this offense, it would be a do-it-all, three-down running back, and that's exactly what Clyde the Glide is. So I think it's easy to say that's the best one. That's the one that'll have the fantasy football fans really excited. He'll be on a winning football team that is expected to be contending for a Super Bowl again. He'll be super productive. He'll get a ton of reps. But I'll say this, Hester, I think a lot of people are sleeping on what K'Lavon Chaisson can do, falling all the way to Jacksonville after they get C.J. Henderson. They're looking to not rebuild because they still have good players, but retool the defense. I think Chaisson was somebody that played his best football down the stretch in that final 2 months of the season against NFL talent at tackle multiple times. So, and he could do a lot of different things, whether it's a good run defender, he can run and cover a little bit. So quietly, because nobody, unfortunately, a lot of people don't always pay attention to Jacksonville. I actually think Chaisson is a guy that's poised to be a really good, impactful player.
Connor, let me ask you this. What do you think Jacksonville does? Josh Allen out of Kentucky had a good, solid season last year. Now you bring in K'Lavon. What do you think defensively they will do to maximize both those guys' talents?
Well, what's interesting to me is they've dragged their feet on trading Yannick Ngakoue. So and I don't think Ngakoue will ever report back to that team. So I'm not going to sit here and fantasize about Ngakoue and Josh Allen on the edge for a second year in a row. And K'Lavon gets to, maybe play some weak side backer, or maybe get to, you could kick Ngakoue inside actually to rush on third downs and still put Chaisson on the outside. I mean, those three guys rushing the passer seems unfair, to be honest with you. I just don't think that's going to happen. So he's going to be asked to play a lot of different roles when they move on from Ngakoue. He's going to have to set the edge on early downs. He's sometimes going to have to drop back and cover, at least zone coverage. I don't know if they're expecting him to line up in man coverage against tight ends and running backs. I don't think that's really fair. I think he'll be at least playing in zone coverage. And on third downs, across from Josh Allen at what'll be probably hand-in-the-dirt rusher, we'll see they'll stand him up as well. I mean, I think he's shown he could do both. He's going to have a lot of pass rush opportunities. So while, Yannick Ngakoue is one of the best pass rushers in the NFL and just entering his prime, I think with Chaisson, you actually have a bigger toolbox to work with. While he's not as technically refined as a pass rusher yet, not even close to Ngakoue, he could do a lot more from a three-down perspective.
Connor Rogers from Bleacher Report joining us here hanging with Hester. Connor, tell me something you don't like about Joe Burrow, if anything.
That's a good one. I guess he doesn't have an elite arm, but I'm also one of those guys that when I scout quarterbacks, that's not something that is even close to make or break for me. I've actually liked quarterbacks over the years that are labeled as guys with average arms. Even Deshaun Watson, who was my top quarterback that year, was classified by many as somebody with an average arm. Now, he throws with touch down the field, and that's what Burrow does, and that's why they were both QB1s in their respective classes, in my eyes. I know Watson didn't go as the first quarterback taken, and I'm sure the Bears regret that. But when you look at it, I guess it would be overall arm strength. I just think in that offense and his mental makeup, his pocket presence, I don't think, Hester, there's ever going to be times where we sit there and go, man, really wish Joe Burrow had more arm strength.
Connor, when you look at the roster for the Cincinnati Bengals, because obviously, look, we're across the state of Louisiana, so we pay attention to the New Orleans Saints, and I do want to get to that team here in a second. But when you look at the Bengals roster, does Joe have any weapons that you can count on? They had a 1,000-yard rusher. They had a 1,000-yard receiver, but I feel like you don't hear about that.
Yeah, you really don't. Number one, I think Joe Mixon can be a top 5 running back in the NFL for the next couple of years because his ceiling as a pass catcher is extremely, extremely high. So I think that's very important for Burrow because somebody we just talked about was very adept at catching the ball in Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So you get Mixon. He really doesn't lose talent in that regard to what he'll have in the backfield with him. And then when you look at wide receiver, there's a lot of different skill sets in that group. I think when you look at A.J. Green, I have no idea what we're going to see with him because the foot injury has dragged on for years now. But when he was on, he could win down the field. He can win in contested catch situations. He was phenomenal in the red zone. I'm curious what we see. When you look at Tyler Boyd, really good possession number 2 kind of receiver. Obviously John Ross hasn't lived up to the billing of a top 10 pick, but he's as fast as anyone in the NFL and can still stretch the field at times. And the guy that he'll have a lot of time to build rapport with, hopefully, is, I guess you can call an old foe, in T. Higgins, who the Bengals are kind of hoping can be A.J. Green light in regards that he'll be a contested catch player. He can offer a lot of strength after the catch. In the red zone, that's the guy that Burrow is going to be looking to down the line. So there's actually a lot of weapons in this offense. They're kind of deep at running back. They're pretty deep at wide receiver. We'll see what they get out of the tight end position. I think the thing everybody's going to be looking to watch is they unfortunately did not get better on the offensive line. So they're really putting a lot of stock invested into the return of Jonah Williams.
Connor Rogers, Bleacher Report, is our guest here on Hanging with Hester. Before we move on to the New Orleans Saints, a couple guys from LSU slid a little bit. Grant Delpit falls into the second round. Christian Fulton, I think he fell lower than anybody else could have expected. Lloyd Cushenberry, kind of a second round, early third round grade. He goes late in the third round. Why do you think those guys slid, and how do you see them with their new squads?
Yeah, so let's start with Delpit. Number one, it's just simply from the film in his final college season where I've been telling Browns fans, and I think you've had similar thoughts here for a while, Hester, expect a big bounce back for Grant Delpit. I mean, I really think so. I do believe he was playing hurt this year. I do believe the Browns are going to pigeonhole him into a role that will actually tailor to all his strengths. They needed help at safety, so he's going to start right away, which is really exciting. And number one, let's not forget, that Browns defensive line with Myles Garrett returning is as good as anyone else's in the NFL, which kind of keeps a lot of bodies off of Grant Delpit. That's really important, too. So for me with Grant Delpit, he fell because simply the film was not great this year. Even on a championship team, a lot of his teammates played better than him, even on the defensive side of the ball. But his sophomore film, it tells the truth of the player he can be, and he should find a bounce-back season in Cleveland. Now, when you look at somebody like Christian Fulton, it's kind of the same story in a sense. It felt like, now with Fulton, it felt like he really was playing through injuries, and then on top of that, you're watching the All-22, and the guy is lined up against Henry Ruggs and Jerry Jeudy, and it's like, and Devonta Smith, and you're sitting there and you're going, all right, most corners on strong legs can't stay with these guys. A guy fighting a lower body injury, trying to fight with these guys, that's a tough billing. Now, what I will say, Fulton, I really liked, once again, his 2018 film. And the film wasn't like Delpit's this year where it's like, he's not a good player. It's like, or he's not playing at even an average level right now. He was. So Fulton is somebody that he fell because I think a lot of teams fell in love with corners that, I'm going to be honest with you, I did not think were better than him. I didn't think A.J. Terrell was a better corner than him. I didn't see Damon Arnett being a better corner than Christian Fulton. So I don't really understand why those guys were taken ahead of him, but it benefits the Titans in the long run that needed a plug-and-play corner, and that's exactly what they got. Now, with Cushenberry, he kind of went right around where I expected. I will say it's interesting that he made it past the Jets picking at 79. I think he went 83rd to the Broncos. So the Jets needed some help on the interior, and they passed on him. Not really an explanation for that one. I thought Lloyd was actually one of the more reliable interior offensive linemen in college football this year, it felt like. It felt like he just always knew his responsibility, where to be, showed ability to get to the second level and open up the run game at times. Pretty reliable player in pass protection. So I think he just didn't have any over-empowering traits to say. I think when you look at somebody like the Saints took in Ruiz, people love the ability for him to move at that size and play guard and center. I think a lot of teams evaluated Cushenberry as strictly a center. And as we've seen over the last 10 years, centers just fall in the draft for whatever reason.
Connor, we'll move over to the Saints. They kind of stuck to the Saints' MO. They were aggressive, and they targeted some players, and they moved up and got them. Cesar Ruiz in the interior offensive line, Zach Bond from Wisconsin, went and got Adam Troutman, the tight end from Dayton, and then Tommy Stevens late in the draft as an interesting draft pick. What did you make of the value that the Saints got?
Well, the first two picks, the value is phenomenal. I thought both should have went in the first round. Obviously, Ruiz does. You love that he could play guard. You love that he could play center. He was the best player on the Michigan offensive line that actually struggled, considering they had a handful of guys drafted this year. That unit struggled, and he was the only guy that every game never really looked out of place. But when you're playing center, there's only so much you can do to keep a unit together. So you turn on the film against Notre Dame, and the guy was just moving people out of the way. He was pulling. He was climbing. He would get his hands on linebackers. It was pretty much over. Michigan just ran the ball down the throat of Notre Dame this year, and that's the film you want to watch with Ruiz. And once again, something that the Saints definitely value here is reliability and pass protection. Now, while they move on from Larry Warford, who's a Pro Bowl guard and a phenomenal run blocker, there were definitely times in pass protection that Warford gets beat, and I think they're looking for, hoping that Ruiz can be an upgrade in that regard even as a rookie. So that's a great pick. Zach Bond falling as far as he did, I don't have an explanation for it. I guess sometimes NFL evaluators look at players like him and go, man, he was asked to rush the passer at the college level, and he did a good job of it. But with his size, we don't see him doing that at the next level. But I looked at it as this is a jack-of-all-trades kind of player. He's somebody that if you put it weak-side linebacker, he has the athleticism to succeed and stop the run and moves very, very well. If you ask him to put his hand in the dirt or be a stand-up rusher, I thought he was very explosive and has great bend off the edge to get after the quarterback from the outside, especially if you have somebody like Cam Jordan that can rush from the interior, where now you're forcing the quarterback to step up into the teeth of the defense. So Bond is somebody that is going to handle a lot of different roles. He showed he can run and cover throughout the draft process and drills. So once again, just a jack-of-all-trades player that I think is going to have a lot of success in that defense. So that was really exciting to see them get him that late. I was lower on Troutman than most, but he went right where I had him graded in the fourth round. I think when you're looking for small school tight ends that kind of dominated the competition and you turn on the film, it looks like it's taking place at a high school most of the time. You're wondering, okay, well, do they have the athleticism to translate to the next level? And he didn't test like that at the combine, but he's very, very competitive and fiery as a blocker. So I think that's something that stands out, and anything you can get out of him in the fourth round would be a bonus. Tommy Stevens is the most interesting one to me because now they have a ton of quarterbacks in this room. So my gut feeling with Stevens is they're going to ask him to not even play quarterback, I would think, or maybe he does. He's an emergency quarterback kind of guy, but I think they're going to look to use him. I don't want to start saying the Taysom Hill thing all over again, but I think Tommy Stevens might be asked to handle a lot of different roles.
Our man Connor Rogers from the Bleacher Report giving you the nitty-gritty of the Saints draft class like nobody else can. Connor, I appreciate you hopping on with us talking LSU and Saints, my man.
Always great talking to you, Hester. Stay safe, man, and we'll talk soon.